So I'm asking one big financial question.
Sure.
I look at the debt, the national debt of America, about 37 trillion and something, and increasing.
Yeah.
Student loan debt's 1.8 trillion. Income from our taxes are now below the interest on our debt. What is that telling you?
So Luke Roman, another great name to follow.
Yeah.
So he's been beating this drum for a long time about the sovereign debt crisis, about the inevitability of the sovereign debt crisis, which he thinks is already underway. And he basically says once your spending, including your interest on the debt, your non-productive spending eclipses your tax receipts, is like you're basically entering the death spiral at that point in time.
Hello, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show. We're broadcasting from Phoenix, Arizona, where it's either heaven or hell, and right now it's hot as hell. And I was talking to a friend who's a real estate agent. It's so hot; she has to wear hot pads to pick up her real estate signs. That's hot. So anyway, and my guest today is a longtime friend, Adam Taggart, and I'm honored to be up with him on the show. And Adam has his MBA from Stanford. That's where my poor dad went to school. And my dad knew I was never going to get into Stanford. So anyway, but the reason I bring up Adam's background is because his show is called Thoughtful Money, because I've known him for years and I watch his show religiously. And the reason for that is Adam has a classically trained mind in the world of economics and finance and macro and minor, but he is a classical trained one. And most of these guys on YouTube are like me. We're kind of dogs who go sniffing around the trash bins and sniff stuff out. So, but I thought Adam, your title of your show, "Thoughtful Money," is excellent title because you come from greater depth on this whole macroeconomic disaster we're cruising into right now. So, Adam, long time. Welcome to the show.
Such a pleasure to be back, Robert. Thank you. I will try to live up to that intro. I kind of see myself maybe as sort of bridging the world of the academically trained and the regular guy sniffing around the trash can like you. So my role, at least as I try to have it be, is to crawl in the brains of those really smart money experts and then try to distill what they think into regular person speak. So hopefully I can do that today while we're talking. Just a quick editorial note. I am not wearing hot pants in case anybody was wondering what was happening below the camera here.
Okay. Anyway, your show is it is Thoughtful Money.
It is. It is Thoughtful Money. Yeah.
And I watch it religiously. So I honored to have you on my program this morning.
Well, thank you. And that's a huge honor to hear that you watch the show, Robert. So anyways, very happy to be here. It's always fun talking to you. And it's not only fun, but it's always just real. So, since we've known each other so long, Robert, let's dispense with all the pleasantries and let's just be real today.
Yeah. So let's get into what's real right now. I mean, you come from higher education and you have Trump going after Harvard and all that stuff. And what, as a layperson, somebody sitting on the sideline watching Trump go after the Department of Education and all this, what goes through your mind?
Honestly, as somebody who, went to Ivy Leagues, I went to Brown undergrad. My brother actually went to Harvard. And then I got my MBA at Stanford, as you mentioned. Honestly, I kind of feel like it's about damn time.
Yes.
Yeah, you'll be hard pressed to find somebody who went through the formal education system, higher education system in this country, who is kind of more down in it than I. And maybe that's a little bit hyperbolic. You can still get a great education at a lot of places. But I think more and more, and this really started when I started college back in the early 90s. Back then it was called PC, or politically correct. That was the movement that then sort of metastasized into what became wokeness. And wokeness really just, it was a contagion that kind of completely infected our higher education schools, especially the elite levels of education, to the point where you've probably heard people say this, they almost became madrasas for this kind of woke ideology. And at the end of the day, look, I'm all for the tolerance and the understanding and the mutual respect that was sort of part of the initial seeds of this movement. but it just devolved into the least tolerant movement out there, where if you don't line up behind whatever, today's woke ideology is, you're going to get canceled, fired, whatever. And the university has to be a safe space for, anybody who doesn't want to be challenged in their thinking. Really the opposite of what higher education should be. At the same time, costs just ballooned out of control. So, most people who were going to college have been paying a ridiculous amount, and too many of them taking on loans that they're probably never going to be able to fully repay, given the reduced salaries they're going to be able to command, given the fact that their degrees mean nothing because they were studying, whatever gender fluid, social songwriting of the 1920s, right? Honestly, I feel like kind of a cleaning of house and a restoration, both of both merit, but also just sort of the traditional canon of what education is supposed to do, which is to prepare people for practical work out in the real world. I think that time is long overdue. And I think that the universities really made a big mistake in the way that they fought back on this. I think they still are. And as a result, I think the comeuppance that they're getting right now is heartily deserved.
Right. And the thing, I value that because both you and I value education. I mean, that's the business we're in.
Yeah, or probably better, we value learning, right? Yeah. And I don't think the education system has done a great job recently of delivering valuable learning.
My education began when I was looking at this little thing. Why is it copper today? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Why is it copper? And I didn't know it, Adam, but I'm 1965. That's how long ago it was. And I said, they're messing with our money. And that's when I got, like I said, I'm a junkyard dog sniffing at the garbage cans. I said, what are they not telling us? Why is this thing copper? And then in 71, Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard. And at that time, I was flying this baby in Vietnam, cruising around the place. And I said, they took the dollar off the gold standard. What does that mean? So again, that's why I acknowledge you for being classically trained. And I had to go sniff it out. What the heck does this mean? What does this mean? And I had to fly behind enemy lines to go buy some gold. And I found out that the story I tell is, I talked to the little Vietnamese woman, we're behind enemy lines because the NV had gone south already. We were going to get our asses killed. And I tried to buy gold at a discount. And she educated me hard on the line, Adam. Yeah. She said, spot. I said, what the hell is that word? Spot. And she has red teeth because they eat beetle nuts. She said, did she go to Harvard or something? And she didn't tell me something. And as you know, that's where we're in this trouble today.
Well, and what's emblematic about that story is sometimes you find the greatest capitalists, in communist or socialist societies, because they know really, where the end game is on those regimes, and they become hardy embracers of capitalism. Again, you go to our higher education, institutions of higher learning here, Robert, they don't even teach you about money. I mean, all this stuff about how money is created, what you sussed out, haggling with that Vietnamese woman behind enemy lines in Vietnam, you learn more about money than what a Harvard graduate gets taught.
Yeah.
Except they get the rationale for why printing it is always a good thing.
Yeah. And that's why Jim Records always says, you don't need to be an economist to know inflation's here.
You don't. Now, one of the nefarious things about inflation is that when it's moderate, it is hard for the average person to suss out. They can kind of feel the accumulation of it over time, but it's sort of like that frog in the pot, right? One of maybe the silver linings of the injury that we took from COVID in terms of the spike in cost of living is it sort of pulled back the curtain, and the average person now got to see, wait a minute, something's going on here. Like, our money is losing purchasing power at a rate that just doesn't feel like it really should. And we have a moment in time here, I think, where we can try to bring more people into the tent of education to explain what's going on here, because they're actually they've been able to see it now. And I think one of the things that I hope doesn't happen here is if the Fed is successful in getting at least the official inflation rate down to 2% or whatnot, and we go back to kind of the slow burn. I really don't want the populace to go back to sleep on this. I want them to remember this and then demand of their future elected officials, hey, we want you to embrace policies that are going to prevent that from happening to us again.
Right. So let's speak to the average person. And the thing that's on my mind, like 71, when Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard, then the U.S. Treasuries and U.S. bonds became gold, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And then today I'm watching the bond market, people are dumping bonds to buy gold now. And so I look at that and I go, my God, what's the end result of all this? So from your position as a classically trained finance guy, what's going to happen with this bond market if they keep dumping it?
So eventually with the bond market, rates will go higher. Right. So for two reasons. One, if people start buying other assets like gold instead of treasuries, there's less demand for treasuries. So bond prices will go down, bond yields will go up. That's just simple math. But as if and as the world starts saying, you know what, like, I think dollars are going to continue to lose their purchasing power now at a faster rate going forward. You got to compensate me for that. And you're just going to see the treasury yield just start shooting the moon. Right now, a lot of people, I just want to correct one narrative here. A lot of people are saying, well, nobody wants to buy the U.S. treasuries anymore. And, the U.S. dollar is going to lose its world reserve currency status and whatnot. It could, and history shows it probably will at some point in time. But that's going to be a slow process, a lot slower than a lot of people who are really ginned up about this, I think, are taking into account. And a big question you have to ask yourself is, okay, well, if you don't want to hold U.S. treasuries, whose debt do you want to hold? And the honest answer is nobody else's is any better. And for a lot of reasons, very few other countries' debts could replace the treasury just from a scale standpoint. So it is highly unlikely that the world is just going to abandon the U.S. Treasury system tomorrow or abandon the dollar tomorrow. Now, that being said, this slow burn, maybe even over time, accelerating burn of purchasing power in the US dollar, I believe is one of the things I've got the highest confidence is going to happen here. It's just going to happen with all fiat currencies. And so you want to ask yourself, how do I protect my wealth against that? And obviously, Robert, that brings us to things like gold.
Right. Thank you. So what advice would you have for, I asked Trump this question one time, what advice would you say to the average investor? And Trump says, don't be average.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. All right. Well, it's going to be hard for me to top that one. But I do have several bits of advice on that. Okay. So first off, kind of to my point there, like, don't just trade by the headlines. Oh, world's dumping the dollar, I got to get out of it tomorrow, right? Type of deal. A lot of regular investors do that, and you got to understand that the headlines are partial at best in terms of what reality is, and oftentimes they're wrong, and sometimes they're the opposite of what's really going on. And a lot of times those headlines are written to kind of trigger you emotionally. Right. And so, an emotional decision around money is very often forcing you to make the wrong decision at the wrong time. So I would definitely not, just see what's on CNBC or look at what's in the headline of, the Journal or whatever, and then rush to trade based on that. I would get smart. Another thing that investors tend to do too is they tend to take on a lot more risk than they need to. Either swinging for the home runs, or Robert, they just haven't done the work to really identify what are my goals? What are my financial goals? What am I shooting for in life? Why am I doing all this, right? And if you're specific about that, if you can really craft and say, look, I want to hit this goal by this time, and you sit down, you actually create a plan on how to get there, you will oftentimes find that you can hit your goal on time by taking less risk than you think. So why try to swing for the home run where you're going to strike out a lot more? And why not focus on hitting doubles and singles that'll safely get to your goal in time with a lot less risk? And so, I find I've had a lot of people just are too reckless.
Yeah, let's call it in my world KISS. Keep it super simple.
Keep it super simple. Exactly. Exactly. I mean, I could tell you how to be a millionaire if you're graduating high school, which I just did this with my niece. I was like, look, I can tell you how to become a millionaire with a high degree of probability by the time you're my age. And it's pretty easy. It actually doesn't. It's not that heavy of a lift. No. You just have to be really committed and really disciplined. But it's a keep it simple strategy.
That's the problem. Discipline.
Yeah. Oftentimes we're our own worst enemies.
We need to go to break, but I want you to think about this, okay? Because you and I are technically teachers. And if you listen to a crackpot on YouTube, a lot of whack jobs out there. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So I'm going to ask you, who do you respect and listen to? In other words, I look to you as one of my teachers.
No, that's a super honor.
Yeah, well, it's an honor to be a teacher. So I'm going to ask you when we come back from the break, who do you respect? And if you're getting an education, let's say you're not at Harvard or Stanford, but you're a junkyard dog, sniffing around the garbage cans.
Yeah.
Who can you tune in on YouTube that you would respect? That's the question I'm going to ask you. Okay.
All right. Look forward to answering it when we come back.
Okay. And we'll be right back with Adam Taggart. We'll be a longtime friend and fellow teacher. We'll be right back.
The U.S. dollar is dying, and most Americans are asleep. In 2025 alone, 11 countries have already dumped the dollar for trade. And China, they're not just talking. They're laying fiber optic cables under the Pacific to launch a digital currency system the world can use to cut America out. This is how empires fall, not overnight, but piece by piece. While average people sit on their couch watching the stock market and telling themselves it's going to be okay. It's not okay. We're buried under $36 trillion in debt. Moody's just slapped us with a credit downgrade. Inflation's still devouring your savings, and your 401k is just hanging by a thread in a rigged system. I've been saying this for years. Don't rely on job security. Don't trust Wall Street. Don't wait for permission. Think like an entrepreneur. Own real assets. Yes, I like gold. I own gold. But right now, silver is the play. Silver demand is exploding. Solar, EVs, military tech, water systems, it's everywhere. But supply drying up. And silver is still around $33 an ounce. I believe silver could hit $70 in 2025, maybe more. And if you want to wait around for CNBC to tell you that it's good time to buy, it'll be too late. So here's what to do. Text silver to 24999. You'll get my 2025 Rich Dad's Guide to Silver for free. It breaks it all down. What's driving silver, why it's still cheap, and how to buy it smart before the next spike. Text silver to 24999 to claim your free guide right now.
Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki Rich Dad radio show. We're so old, we still call it a radio show instead of the clickbait show, or whatever we should call it. But anyway, we've been on for a long time. Adam's been a great friend of ours, and we're talking today about education. And Adam is classically trained, and I consider myself a junkyard dog who sniffs around the garbage cans, or YouTube, should I say. And there's a lot of clickbait, a lot of false prophets up there, a lot of people promising, you'll be a millionaire if you do this. And I listen to their stuff, I just cringe. And yet, Adam, when you see their following, they're followed. So my question to Adam Taggart is, who do you listen to? That's who are your teachers? Because a teacher is a very, very important position in anyone's life.
Well, I couldn't agree more about that. And to your point about, some of these people out there, Robert, who have very large followings, but you're concerned about the quality of the advice they're giving. A lot of times they have a very large following because they are playing to what I was talking about earlier with the headlines, right? I think you used the term clickbait, right? They are, trying to sort of foment emotional responses in people to get views, to get clicks. And they're not really focused on the substance of what they're, or the value of what they're delivering. They're just trying to do what's going to get them the most revenues per viewers, right? And I'm not going to mention any names in this world. But there are definitely people that are out there doing that. Now, what I like to do with my channel, which, is a more modest channel, but I like to develop, what I call more financially nutritious content. And I think that's why channels like mine and like yours, Robert, attract the viewers that they do. These are people who feel like, I'm not getting well served by the regular mainstream financial media. It's just not actionable for me. It's not practical enough for me. So they're coming online to self-educate, and they're trying to find trusted sources like you. So again, kudos to you for what you've been doing here. One of the things that most of the more successful self-made people that I know, Robert, do is they cultivate a board of mentors, a board of advisors. In fact, you do this, right? With the Rich Dad advisors, right?
Right.
And so, that's essentially what I've done with my channel, which is, as you know, Robert, it's, I get on the best minds and money in the markets. And then I do a really deep dive, hour-long interview with you where I just try to pull out, what's in their head and make it as visible and understandable to the viewer. So the viewer can say, okay, this really smart person thinks these key things, and I might want to take action on that, based on this, right? So to your question about who do I listen to or who do I respect, who are my teachers, I'm very fortunate to be able to talk to a ton of smart people every week like this. So I do 4 to 5 interviews a week. I would say some of the ones that are at the top of the list are, I'll give you a few names, and they sort of span the age and experience spectrum. At the high end are guys like Lacey Hunt and Thomas Honig. And those are probably not like everyday names. I'm not sure if it's going to resonate with.
Second name was Thomas what?
Thomas Honig.
How do you spell that?
Hoenig.
Okay, I'll follow him now. Okay, good.
Yeah. So both of them have worked for the Federal Reserve, which you might be like, oh my God, why are you listening to folks in the Federal Reserve? These are guys that worked in the Federal Reserve, and then after their time there, what came out of it saying, that is one of the most dysfunctional institutions around, and it is doing policy that is anti what we should be doing. And Tom Honig was quite famous because he ran he was the CEO of the St. Louis Fed, I think, for a number of years. But then he actually sat on the Federal Open Markets Committee. This is that small table of people that vote on what the interest rate's going to be. Wow. And he is on record as having the longest stretch of dissents of anybody on the FOMC, because this was during the era where Bernanke was starting to usher in quantitative easing, and he wanted a unanimous vote. And at every vote, Honig was like, no, this is going to end up overinflating asset prices, creating wealth inequality, and eventually leading to inflation. And he eventually left, and history has proven him right. So, it's incredibly valuable to hear these guys who have been there in the center of the seats of power. They know how the institution works. They know how the people work at them. And they come out of it, basically being willing to be honest and saying, look, these are all the elements that are going on in these areas that do not serve the interests of the American public. And they've been very big advocates for what they consider to be much better monetary policy. Sadly, the system isn't listening to them. It treats them more as outsiders and heretics at this point in time. But I think over time, eventually, they're kind of the early guard of the folks that are delivering the hard truth, and eventually that standard will get picked up as the current system really starts to fail. On the younger end of the socioeconomic spectrum, I'm going to mention this guy named Darius Dale. Don't know if you're familiar with him.
Wait, you guys spell his name? D-A-L-E?
Last name is D-A-L-E. Yeah, Darius Dale. Yeah. Darius was a former football player and highly well-educated young man. I think he's in his early 30s. But he puts out basically institutional grade analysis. So he's got a lot of, big Wall Street firms that buy his analysis. But his passion is creating a version of that for the regular retail investor. And if you watch a video with Darius, let's say it's an hour-long video, you get about 3 or 4 hours worth of content packed into that hour. One, because he's a very animated, very fast speaker, but he just brings a torrent of charts. So everything he says is backed up by just reams and reams of data. But I think one of Darius's real skills is he's able to take all that and break it down in a way that the average investor can take in. And at the end of the day, he runs a portfolio for the regular investor, which he calls the KISS portfolio, the Keep It Simple, Stupid model. Yeah. Actually, his stands for Keep It Simple and Systematic. But he ends up basically just using 3 to 4 different funds. And depending on what's going on in the world, it's either, okay, we brought this fund down a little bit, we increased our exposure to this fund. But it's a way to basically surf what's happening in the markets using about the simplest number of inputs that I've ever seen. But I will say, of all the people that I've interviewed over the years, Darius's track record over the past 2 to 3 years has been spookily good. And oftentimes, sometimes the simplest approach can be the best approach. So he's a great mind.
And Lacey Hunt, I love Lacey because he just keeps it simple.
He does. And Lacey, he personally knew the greats, Milton Friedman, Paul Volcker. Lacey actually worked with these people, met with these people, talked with these people. They were friends of his. So, of the actual greats of, like the real, tried and true economic thinkers, not the bastardized version that we have now, before it all got corrupted. He's of that generation. He really is kind of like the last of the greatest generation in economics. Man, the fact that he's still willing to share what he knows at our age and be as transparent about, what he thinks is wrong with the current system, it's a gift to be able to talk to him. Yeah.
Anybody else? He can break. That was a good time because, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, both were teachers, great teachers, but they didn't teach me the same subject.
Same subjects. Yeah. So, literally, Robert, I could give you a long, long list. I'll throw out a couple of names. Stephanie Pomboy is another great macro thinker.
Oh, she's amazing.
Yeah, she's wonderful and a delight too. And again, a lot of these people have the ability to think big, but talk in just real terms. And Stephanie is wonderful at that. Yep. There's a housing analyst named Melody Wright. I don't know if you follow her, Robert, but she is fantastic.
What's her name?
Melody Wright. And she had a front row seat to the
WRIGHT.
Exactly. WRIGHT. Yeah. Okay. And she publishes a free Substack for anybody that's interested in following her. She had a front row seat to the global financial crisis. She worked for, was it GE Capital? When they got involved in lending and everything hyper exploded there. She was there basically trying to, do the workouts on all these, horrible mortgage loans that they had. So she really had a front row seat to that crisis. And she has been following the housing market ever since. She's been increasingly worried over the recent years as the housing market has started to get weaker and weaker. And she does a great job of combining both like a very rigorous data-driven approach with a boots on the ground approach. So she gets in her car every couple of weeks and goes to a Houston, a Dallas, a Phoenix, whatever, and drives around and tries to marry what the data that she's finding in her data sets, how that maps to what people say on the ground. She drives to housing developments. Is this development getting abandoned by the developer? Like she really marries the real world and the academic. Yeah. And she's just, again, a wonderful person to boot.
That's called integrity. Do you know what I mean?
You know what? That's a great word to describe Melody. I do. I know this is kind of sound like I'm trying to cozy favor with you, Robert, but, a great teacher of mine has been you. And my niece just graduated high school last week, and she came up to me because she knows vaguely what I do. And she says, "Uncle Adam, I want you to teach me how to do money." So I put together kind of an hour-long curriculum for her, and she came over the other night, and we went through it. And I started and ended with examples from you, Robert. So just know that your work continues to inspire not even just my generation, but even the young up-and-comers.
Well, I appreciate that because that's I think as teachers, nothing makes us happier than seeing your students blossom.
Oh, absolutely. As I like to tell people, look, information in and of itself has no value. It only has value when you apply it, right? So the fact that we're passing the torch along to people who are going to be taking it to improve their lives and hopefully improve their communities as well and the overall economy. I mean, that's where the real, where my real passion and gratitude comes from.
Okay. So I'm asking one big financial question.
Sure.
I look at the debt, the national debt of America, about 37 trillion and increasing.
Yep.
Student loan debt's 1.8 trillion. Income from our taxes are now below the interest on our debt. What is that telling you?
So Luke Gromen, another great name to follow for folks that don't know Luke. Luke Gromen,
yes,
Gromen.
Yeah.
So he's been beating this drum for a long time about the sovereign debt crisis, about the inevitability of the sovereign debt crisis, which he thinks is already underway. And he basically says once your spending, including your interest on the debt, your non-productive spending eclipses your tax receipts, is like you're basically entering the death spiral at that point in time. So, Robert, I think we are entering that death spiral. When does it actually all come apart? I don't know. Is it tomorrow? Is it 10 years from now? I don't know. But what I do know is unless the one thing that I think could buy us some runway, I don't really have confidence it's going to get us out of the spiral in the long term. I think we're going to end up with a currency crisis where the currency will eventually die and have to be replaced by something more sound. But something that could buy us time would be if the current Trump administration's economic policies get enacted and have the outcomes that the administration hopes they will. There's a lot that's going on there that is making me more optimistic in the midterm. I'm kind of pessimistic in the near term. I do think that the odds for a substantial market correction and a recession are uncomfortably high in the next 12 months or so. A couple of years out of that, I'm actually becoming more optimistic than I've been in a good long while, because I think that if these policies end up getting implemented and have the results that we hope, that's actually going to boost economic growth pretty substantially. And that can be used to hopefully reduce our government deficit spending, at least as a percentage of GDP. Trump has at least given lip service to throwing some of this money at the debt. Will he? I don't know. But all of that can slow things down for a bit. I'm then very pessimistic in the long run for the issues that we've talked about, Robert, the debt spiral and the currency devaluation.
Yeah. And did you have any great teachers in school?
That's a good question. Yes, I did have some great teachers in school. I mean, I don't want to say, look, I think we should have a great education system. I'm not for dismantling the education system. I'm just for reforming it. I did have some great teachers, but what I do want to say real quick, Robert, before we wrap up, is something that's very important to the message I try to get out there about money is you want to understand it. It is very important, but it is not all important. And at the end of the day, money is the means to an end. It's not the end in and of itself. The goal is not to die atop a huge pile of cash, right? It's to use that money to invest in the things that are going to give you the greatest happiness in life, right? And research is really clear on what those are. It's three things. Yeah. It's quality relationships. So at our base level, we are social primates. That's what we evolved from. And we still see the world and derive our happiness from it through our relationships. You don't need a ton of them, but you need at least a few good ones. I consider you one of my good, solid, folks I could call at 2 a.m. in the morning, Robert. So it's that, it's purpose. It's having meaning when you wake up in the morning and, feeling that the world is at least marginally better, that you existed in it. You don't have to cure cancer, but you just have to be doing something that's important to you that you think, net makes the world at least a little bit better. Yeah. And then the third is health, because if you don't have health, life's pretty miserable, right? So at the end of the day, money is great, but really focus on those key three things. Right. And, with the money comes, if the money goes, if you're rich in those three things, you're already winning life. And the irony is if you're rich in those three things, the money is much more likely to come because you're living your full authentic self, and you're likely to outperform.
Right. I like what Robert Kennedy Sr. said. He says, to those whom so much has been given, much is required. And the word was required. I thought that was a very interesting thing. So the reason I want to acknowledge you is because you and I have enough money, but it is required we teach.
Yes.
Does that make sense
Yes.
to you?
No, absolutely. I see it as an obligation.
Yep.
If you are fortunate enough to, I think, educate yourself to the point where you feel like you see the world relatively accurately, and you've been able to use that information to advance your station, then your responsibility is to bring your community, your culture, and the next generations along with you. In fact, I'm just watching a documentary right now about one of my favorite presidents, Theodore Roosevelt. And that was what he said was the key thing his father taught him. Because Roosevelt grew up in a very privileged family. And his father said, son, look, wealth is great, and you should make the best use of it for yourself. Right. But with it comes a responsibility that you need to, basically use it as a tool to bring up society. And fortunately, Roosevelt took that very seriously.
Adam, amen on that one. That's our job as teachers. You know what I mean? We both blessed from different directions, different paths, but we're giving back now. So it's required we do this. So
it is. And I just want to note that, it's all about passing the torch. And Robert, you did pass the torch to me. I'm a little younger than you. I read your book when it first came out when I was 29. I bought it for all my siblings then. My daughters have received it. And now hopefully with my channel, I'm inspiring folks younger than me and trying to pass that torch too. So anyways, thank you for being the key link in the chain in my life, but in the lives of all your viewers too.
Well, Adam, thank you very much for being a fellow teacher. And then let's stay in touch and keep teaching. So thank you for being a friend and a fellow teacher. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on, my friend. It's been wonderful.
Thank you. And we're right back for our final word. Again, thank you to Adam Taggart. Welcome back. And again, thank you to longtime friend Adam Taggart and a fellow teacher. Final words is that your teachers are the best and the worst in your life. You have a bad teacher, well, it'll screw you up. But you have a great teacher, they'll inspire you to greatness. And I've been blessed to have several great teachers. And in fact, there have been several men I consider like my rich dads, they're called mentors. So I seek them out, and that's how I learn. But one of my best teachers had us I went to military school, and we had to read this book here. And I asked I'm at military school. I didn't go to some woke liberal arts college. And so I asked my teacher, he was a West Point graduate, B-17 pilot. I said, why are we studying communism? He says, you have to know your enemy. I went, wow. And when I read this book here, as you know, America's coming apart right now. We don't need to go to China or Russia to find communists. They're all inside us. As Marines would say, they're inside the wall right now. So ladies and gentlemen, it's best to know your enemy. And that was my teacher at the academy. And he says, you got to know them well. So I thank you all for listening to the Rich Dad Radio Show. Thank your teachers and keep learning. Thank you again.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.